Hey everyone, thank you for coming. I'm Kelas. I've been disabled for about 2 decades. I have constant vertigo and I have chronic muscle pain as well as a few other issues. This is...
I'm Sid, Alexander Siddig, to be uninitiated. I suffer from a myriad of invisible disabilities, some of which I don't know myself yet, but none of which are as consequential or important as the discussions we're going to have today. And one of the reasons why I mention that is that there are grades of disability.
I'm Rob, I'm from the UK, and I've had a high-level spinal cord injury for nearly 24 years now, which apparently changed my life in every single way possible, in terms of going from complete independence to complete dependence on others for absolutely everything, pretty much quicker than you can click your fingers, really.
And we're going to talk about disability, which is a subjective and personal matter. And we can't possibly know everything, so we will get things possibly wrong or things that you disagree with, and that's okay. If you want to comment at the end, we welcome all input, because obviously we can't know everything.
And we also apologise for our sense of humour.
Can I start by saying, how did you get into Star Trek? And what is your favourite series? I suppose we should get like mundane right now. Let's just get the corny stuff out of the way.
I'm going to age myself, but I was 4 years old when Encounter at Farpoint Station aired, and Dad sat me down with it because he loved the classic series, and I've been a Star Trek fan ever since. My favorite series, though, is Deep Space Nine. So
You're on the right track. Rob, you're a rebel.
Yeah, I was 7 years old. I really first got into watching the original series with my mum. Really hated the really wobbly sets. Thought they were absolutely awful. And then I saw, I think it was either yesterday's Enterprise or Best of Both Worlds from the Next Gen, and saw all the really modern, cool tech and thought, wow, that's cool. But if you were to ask me my favourite series, it's got to be the one with, the really cute Doctor, honestly.
so Discovery?
Pressure too.
Voyager.
Has your perception, I'm going to I'm opening this so that you can banter back and forth if you want, but has your perception of the representation of disability in Star Trek changed since you realised, or in your case, since you became disabled?
Yeah, like I was oblivious to it before I became disabled. Like, yes, Geordi was blind, but it didn't really matter to me. Most of the episodes featuring disability just passed me by. I took no notice of them until I was disabled, and then they stood out.
I was exactly the same as well. So my favourite character, actually on the Next Gen, was Geordi. And it didn't have anything to do with the fact that he was blind. He was the fix-it guy. He was the one that everyone went to kind of, fix most of the problems. And his blindness had absolutely nothing to do with his ability to do that kind of work. You never saw Picard kind of, going to the doctor and saying, do you think he's up for it today? Do you need to make special accommodations? All of those sorts of things. It was just a, Geordi, you okay? Yep, go. And I really liked that. And I think then seeing it afterwards from that alternate perspective, I really appreciated that, and I wanted to do that going forward, so that I'd never use my wheelchair as an excuse for not doing any work. And I've always wanted to be kind of treated as anyone else would be, irrespective of wheelchairs, disabilities, those sorts of things.
Yeah, because this is really interesting to me, because I too, I'm really going off script a bit here, but
That's actually 5 minutes.
I do. Yes, the election was stolen. Wait a minute.
Oh no.
Because I am like you pre-disability. Well, actually, I'm like you pre-meeting you, much more important. And that I didn't realise, or didn't pay any attention to, the idea of disability, because I didn't have to. And because it wasn't really, I wasn't confronted by it. And it was a bit my laziness, and also, that's on a very subliminal level, but possibly my kind of guilt that I was just fine. and I didn't really want to mess with that. And by stepping up, I risked crossing the line into activism. And I didn't want to be an activist, you know. I don't want to march with the Black Lives Matter movement, although God bless them, I obviously empathize with them. But, and I think a lot of people have that are suffering from my sense of my own myopia, the same things that I'm suffering from. Because we have problems getting our kids through college, etc., etc. So I'm trying to equate this with the real world sort of calculus. That how do you overcome the sense of innate laziness / monkey see no evil, hear no evil situation that really happens in the world? And how do you feel about that, given that you have both been on both sides of the coin? Big question. Because because this is back to script, because what I think this has something to do with is what makes for good disability representation. And why does disability representation matter? Obviously, we're seeing other movements burgeoning and blossoming, and some are doing well and some are not doing so well. In my mind, the disability movement has been a more polite movement, for want of a better way of putting it, than some of the other movements out there. And your politeness is due to what?
I mean, a lot of the places are inaccessible, so getting into them and causing problems can be a problem.
So it's a very practical issue.
Yeah, there's a lot in the way. What really got the ADA to be passed in the United States was that a whole bunch of disabled people occupied a government building. But we also couldn't do that without support. We had the Black Panther Party giving us food and water and also supplying power from the outside for various mobility aids and things that were needed to keep us alive. So I think part of our challenge is also that a lot of political movements are very fragmented right now. So, like, they're all very important. Trans rights are under threat, and trans people are focusing on that, and all the other LGBTQ rights are under attack, and LGBT groups are focusing on that. Black Lives Matter groups are focused, and disability is focused, and because we're all splintering, we're not as strong as we used to be.
Yeah.
We're not as effective.
And so do you think popular media, like Star Trek, can help, and how can it help in that sense?
I mean, I wouldn't call it polite at all. I'd probably call it impolite in terms of how it's been portrayed over recent years. I think if you ask anyone who's been, either had some sort of disability, where they've acquired the injury, whatever it is that you want to call it, they very much feel like almost like a second-class citizen, an afterthought, an echo. I mean, even if you look at building designs these days, 98% of them will have steps at the front, and then builders will think, oh God, I've got to put a side door in an access door. If you look at places like Florida, where particularly, veterans came back from Vietnam in the 1970s, they've had 50 odd years. And most of the buildings, certainly that I've seen whilst my parents have been living over there, they're just accessible to everyone because they've gone through that change. But I think still most buildings all over the world, it's still very much an afterthought. And I think what Star Trek can do is about trying to normalise disability, but see things from their perspective rather than the outside and everyone else looking in on them. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things they can do.
I think that's extremely perfect. I've been very lucky this weekend. I think I'm maybe 15 or 20 people. I've talked to quite a lot of people today this weekend, and I think a large chunk of those people have said, I have a disability, and Bashir, weirdly, who's not overtly disabled, has been a real source of confidence to me. Has given me a sense of self. During a period, usually adolescent period, where I was very confused and upset, and misguided anger was flying in all different directions. Do you think that's the sort of thing, do you think that kind of soft representation, because I think Bashir is very much soft representation rather than overt representation, is more effective? Do you think they're tandemized? They should be, this this kind of multi-pronged representation in the media, especially shows like Star Trek, which are huge. I just think are the important ones. I think that you need the mass media stuff to really get the ball rolling.
I think both are important. So the ones that are more subtle help the disabled people because they can recognize various symptoms and issues that they see on screen in themselves. Like Tilly is not overtly stated to be autistic, but is assumed to be somewhere on the spectrum. And I think autistic people can find comfort in that. That's what I've been told by autistic people. I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak for them.
You're here to speak for them sometimes. So you're okay.
We agree.
But I think in terms of mass media representation, seeing people with declared disabilities, with clear disabilities, is what's going to help more people pay attention and more people relate. And the point is, we're a lot of out of sight, out of mind, because society is built to keep us out of sight and out of mind. So if we're on the screen, that's when conversations happen, that's when notice is taken. There is an ensign in a couple of episodes of Discovery who is in a wheelchair. He has no backstory, he has no name, but he was zipping through the corridors. And that was noticed by a lot of people. It caused some outrage because people thought that disability should be fixed by them. But what it really says is that, like, they accept disability as a reality, and they also, somewhere on the Discovery, there's a department where someone in a wheelchair has seamless accommodation. They're just a part of the crew. No one turned around to take notice of him. He was not an exception. He was just part of the crew. And that matters a lot for us to be included like that, just seamlessly integrated. Yeah.
You said something really interesting to me a few months ago. You may not remember it. We've had a discussion or two in the past. That it was really important to you that disability, and there was a show called Melora that we were referencing specifically in Deep Space Nine, where there was a paraplegic person, and it was really, we talked about the fact in the future this will not happen. There's no such thing. Everything gets fixed immediately by walking into a scented shower or something.
If only it was that simple.
Exactly. But you said it was really important to you that that didn't happen, that they remained visibly disabled. Tell me a little bit more about that, because that seems to link up with what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I think what I was saying at the time was that bodies are just going to keep failing. Like, the natural state of the universe is to head toward entropy. So even if we fix something that we know today, something new will come up tomorrow. There will always be disability with us. Bodies will always find a way to fail.
Why, Rob, because I know this is sort of important to you, why should people not feel sorry for you?
Because I don't feel sorry for myself. I just want to live a normal life. Whenever I've talked with people, I've been in some pretty strange places where people have called me inspirational and they've never met me before. It's been, I've been in a nightclub, I've been buying bread, I've been having a drink with friends. What's inspirational about that? It's because they can't think of anything non-offensive to say to me.
I wonder though, I'm going to play devil's advocate, I wonder if they're truly being empathetic. Because I think there can be...
I don't think they were being empathetic in the nightclub.
Okay. Because I think you can, at 1,000 yards, be inspirational to someone, just because of your smile and your aura.
I think if someone knows what I do, if they know about the work that I do, the fact that I'm trying to make things better for other people going through a similar experience at some point in their future lives, okay, that's fair enough. But when they can't think of anything else to say, and they just want to say something simply so that they're not going to offend me, that actually becomes quite offensive in itself.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And do you think fear plays a bit of a part in that?
Yes.
That kind of untouchable notion?
And I think that's where normalising disability for me is an absolutely massive one, because certainly on TV shows in the UK back in the early noughties, there was just this spate of every single scene had to have a quote-unquote token disabled person sitting somewhere in the corner. And now, it's starting to kind of lurch towards the other extreme where it's trying to put them front and centre. There's got to be that kind of happy middle ground where it is, people just going about their daily lives, doing their work, and they don't even question it.
What gives you hope in terms of Star Trek? What is it? What are the high points? What do you think? 2 steps forward before the inevitable 1 step back. And I probably put it the wrong way. Can you both talk about a high point and a low point in Star Trek's history? I just flipped it.
Gotcha. So the highest point for me would be in Star Trek: The Next Generation, the episode called "Loud as a Whisper." There's a diplomat named Reva who is deaf, and he has a chorus that communicates with him. They're his accessibility device, essentially. And there are several points in the episode that are made, like people initially address his chorus, and he points out, no, talk to me, I'm a disabled person. That mirrors real life a lot, because often if we have a PA or a handler or someone helping us out, people will talk to them instead of us.
Yeah. I've done that.
And then, his chorus is killed. And the Enterprise's solution is not, well, we need to buckle down and find a cure, or we need to instantly replace him. It's, how can we accommodate him? How can we make this still work for him? Because he's still this guy. He's still a master diplomat who taught the Klingons the word for peace. He wasn't dismissed because of his disability, and Data went and learned several different sign languages to communicate with him. Deanna started connecting with him empathetically, and in the end, the solution was that the 2 warring races needed to learn how to communicate with him with sign language, and in doing so, they would learn how to communicate with each other and find peace. So he was integral to the entire episode, and he was never just a problem. He was never undermined. He had that support.
Yeah. So that I kind of, the inference there is that the automatic response from people is to try and fix. But fixing isn't necessarily the situation. The ideal response is to talk and find out exactly what is wanted, what is needed, but on an individual level. Because sometimes trying to fix actually does more harm than good.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. Well, this is the point where the script is finished.
Well, Rob should get to answer first.
I've got 2 for the next gen. One, again, I go back to Geordie. In the certainly post-injury, I got to appreciate him from a completely different perspective. And, again, going back to the episode with Reva, there's a really good conversation between the 2 of them there where they're in effect comparing their disabilities. And I think Reva asks them at one point, do you resent do you resent being blind? And Geordie's just like, do I resent actually being blind or the visor itself, because the visor causes them pain? And he said, well, both. And Geordie says, well, no, because they're part of me, they're who I am. And he understood that. And that's certainly, I take that forward, with me. My wheelchair is just part of me. And that's something that I really liked, particularly about that episode. But again, going back to Geordie, just the fact that he was normalised, he went away on away missions like anyone else. His visor actually became an advantage in several episodes as well. So I think there was Heart of Glory where certainly Captain Picard actually on the view screen got to see what life was like through his visor. And he was just like, who's that in the corner? It's like, well, that's Riker. Who's that one with the glow around him? It's like, well, that's Data. And then he said something really funny. It was, he's got a glow around him. It's like, well, yeah, don't you see that glow around him as well? It's like, no, we don't see that glow at all. It's like, oh, so they were both learning from each other, just in that one little segment. So I thought that was a really good way of people with different abilities actually learning from each other about their kind of their strengths and weaknesses. And that was particularly around Geordie. That was an important one for me. And then the other one from Next Gen would actually be Tapestry, which is certainly an episode that I've used, and it jumped out at me when I was watching it in hospital actually. And I never really thought about it before. I used to like all the kind of, the action sequences, the gun battles, that kind of thing. But then post-injury, Tapestry just leapt out at me because of its message. Whenever people ask me if I regretted what happened to me, I would just say, well, no, because I can't go back, I can't change it. And that whole message behind that, if you just change one thing in your life, you're not just changing that one thing, you're changing who you are as a person, and that really kind of stood out to me. So now, whenever people do ask that question, I literally say no before they've even finished asking it. And when I explain about that episode and that message, they suddenly understand. So I think that one's become one of my kind of top 5 TNG episodes now.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, I think something we should say that, Coda won the Best Oscar this year. I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Do you think do you feel optimistic because of that sort of move, the way that really, that was a dark horse and outsider, there was no chance Coda was involved in the discussion. But clearly it touched a nerve in wider society. I mean, wider society, narrower society, because it's the Academy, which is probably only about 10,000, 15,000 voters. But that's a pretty sizable chunk of people. How do you feel about tomorrow?
I think it's not necessarily the win itself. I think it's the discussion that's going to fall out from that afterwards. That's going to be the interesting one to kind of see the ripple effect. I mean, if you look at episodes like, I'm sorry, I'm going to mention it, Ethics, with Wolf, where he ends up injured, and he thinks that his life is over. That was really meant to be a discussion about, euthanasia, suicide, and thinking that your life's over just because you're a wheelchair user. And even by the end of it, he was only actually fighting it really for his son, which, for me, was a hell of a lot of pressure to put on a young kid. I think particularly when you go through something like this, you've actually got to do it for yourself first, and then other people. So I think it was trying to promote a discussion, but I think it did it in exactly the wrong way. So that was probably a low point for me, but I think the discussion that falls out from this, that will be the interesting one to keep an eye on.
I just think as long as the next disability film doesn't get beaten by another octopus, we'll be doing well.
Because for me, I'm obviously playing catch up, but there's a silver lining is that I'm here with you, and to me that's enormous progress because I can't imagine myself together with you guys just 6 months ago, and I already knew you. And the darker side of that is that this room should be full, and the reason why it isn't is because you were waiting for 45 minutes yesterday for some people to come and help publicize this event through Instagram and whatnot. And that didn't happen because the crew who were supposed to come and publicize this event didn't bother turning up. And I suspect they didn't bother turning up because it wasn't really an exciting subject for them personally. And one day they will, hopefully sooner rather than later, and if I ever do one of these things again, I will be very angry, which is uncharacteristic. But I knew by then I didn't have time to get anything wrong. And the combination of progress and lack of progress on top of each other must be just incredibly frustrating.
We have a wheelchair and a stick between us, and we're not afraid to use either of them.
I'm the stick. People have referred to me as a stick all my life.
No, I'm the one who talks softly and carries the big stick.
So I think if you think this is an opportune moment, it would be lovely to have a few responses or at least a couple of questions from the audience.
Let's go ahead. Melissa?
Just something that popped into my mind while you were talking. I believe Roddenberry asked at some point why in the future, for example, they still had blind people, and he responded to the effect of, well, how do you know what you have, what he has is better?
Absolutely. Did you hear that at the back?
No. So Roddenberry,
thank you. No, please tell them.
Roddenberry was asked at one point, and it might have been by LeVar Burton, I'm not sure, but why are there still blind people in the future? And Roddenberry's response was to the effect of, well, how do you know what he has isn't better? Isn't better.
Is not better.
Yeah, sorry, I have a very small. How do you know what he has isn't better? Being blind, and it turns out to be an advantage in a lot of the episodes, so, yeah. Great.
Absolutely.
I think that's the biggest thing for me, that just the label disability itself, as I've talked with you about before, is a complete misnomer. We all have things that we can and can't do.
as I opened with about myself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, why should you instantly have a label that just says that you can't do something? We all find different ways of doing things. We all have strengths and weaknesses. I just use this chair to get from A to B. Nothing more than that. It doesn't define my life.
I think if it's used in contrast with disabled and pre-disabled, it's a lot more accurate instead of disabled versus able-bodied.
Yeah.
Because everyone is either headed toward disability or disability and then death, or just death, to be very cheerful.
Put that one on Twitter, Mel.
Do we have any questions? Go ahead.
So I'm very curious what your takes are on this, because we have, I will say, disability has long been part of Star Trek. Captain Pike in the menagerie shows up in this little thing with because they couldn't catch air. But we know there will be some kind of storyline there eventually with Captain Pike, and we've seen it in Discovery. And so this is what I'm really curious about. What was your kind of reaction, your take on that moment in Discovery when Pike learns of his fate and chooses? Obviously, the intent is, he knows, even though there will be disability in his future, he's saving lives, doing it's supposed to be this heroic thing. But in effect, it is him choosing eventual disability that he knows, and he knows, doesn't know exactly when, but he knows how. And so what's your take on that as a choice of disability rather than necessarily just a heroic choice? And then what are your hopes for how that might play out here in Strange New Worlds as we see it happen?
The funny thing is, we actually discussed this, and we had something that we were probably going to get around to talk about this. So, how about if I take the past and you want to take the future?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, Pike's initial appearance in TOS was actually way more powerful if you realize the context of the time. At the time, the ugly laws were still in place across the US, which meant that disabled people who were considered unsightly needed to be kept out of sight. They could not be in public areas. And in fact, Chicago was the last city in the United States to repeal them in 1974. So Star Trek showed a clearly, physically very disabled man before the ugly laws were banished. So having Pike there like that, a former captain, someone Spock respected, was extremely powerful. The Discovery moment was questionable. I'm sorry. I know that it was meant to be inspirational, but the implication was also, this is a fate worse than death. That's what's facing you. Disability being worse than death. And that's what a lot of people will come up and say, I couldn't live the way you do. In essence, saying that they would choose death over that. And that's also what ethics got into. We've been born to not go off too long on ethics. But it is a very common thing to assume that disability is worse, but it's not. We have lives. It's the way society is shaped that makes it more complicated. And so I think for able-bodied people, that scene with Pike and Tenevik was powerful. I think for a lot of disabled people, it was really discouraging.
I think if anyone was to show me a video of my accident in slow motion, I would probably scream as loudly as Pike did in Discovery as well. But I think, when I was in hospital, there were people actually coming up to me and my family saying, of all the people who we know who could go through an experience like this, you're the ones who could get through it. And I think you don't know how you're going to get through an experience until you actually go through it. So I think we could understand the sentiment, but I think them saying it was a bit, again, disingenuous. And my hope for Pike, I think, going forwards, is that knowing his future, A, won't stop him from doing what he thinks is right, even though any number of his decisions may actually land him in that wheelchair at some point. But B, I think, again, it goes back to the point that I made at the beginning, that rather than seeing from the perspective of everyone looking at him and the disability, I actually want to hear what it's like from his perspective. with the disability, and although you may only hear or see a yes or a no to everyone else, he may still have an internal voice going. He may be absolutely screaming inside his body, kind of go, no, I want to do this, no, I want to do this, but it might only come out as a no to everyone else. So I want to hear from his perspective what it's like being disabled, and that he wants to find some way either to contribute to society in some way if he can, or if it's his choice to go off and live on Kelas with, I've forgotten the name already.
Was it delusion?
Yeah, Vina. Then if that's his choice, okay, fair enough. But I think the way that they've set up certainly Pike's kind of legacy at the moment is that going off to live there is almost a bit of a metaphor for giving up suicide, those sorts of things. Whereas if it's his choice to do that, okay, fair enough. But I think it would be nice to see him say, look, I still want to try and contribute if I can first. But I think from the previews of Strange New Worlds and the little snippets of his dialogue so far, I'm not sure if that's going to happen.
It would also be kind of fun if, when he's walking around the ship, like some of you have probably seen those set pictures, there are a lot of places where you're not going to get a wheelchair, just period, on that entire set. So it'd be kind of funny if he's going around the set and he's like, oh, I might not be able to take those stairs in the future. How about, and he doesn't tell them this, but he's like, maybe we should just make a ramp here. And just, seamlessly,
Or if he does it for someone else, that'd be nice as well.
Yeah.
Help other people at the same time, because then it makes it, again, accessible for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Next question? Yeah.
I have a lot of words.
Get them all out.
I just wanted to say, Jesus, I think that there needs to be a discussion about ableism in nerd spaces. This is the first thing this session itself is the first thing I've got to where I sat down next to a person and they didn't move away. And I tried to tell people, I'm not contagious. You are not going to become disabled from sitting by me. And it's so uncomfortable. I'm like, this is genetic. You're not my father's child. This is fine. And I also Jesus. Sorry for all the My brain is so
Don't worry about it at all.
I also had, if so many discussions where when disabled people are talking about Star Trek and other nerd things, and so many ables just come in and are like, but Jordy, and we're like, so what? We need more. And we're like, Jordan is great. All my life I was like, I love him. I mean, he says he likes his visor. And I grew up in a home where I was constantly, I was constantly taken to different doctors with my parents please cure her. And it was heartbreaking because I was like, I am just what I am, And I really, sorry, I have all these feelings. Great. Jesus. It was very great to have people be like, I like who I am. And then later this year, being like his parents, made him into what they wanted him to be. It was very healing to me. And thank you very much for that, but also so many feelings. And I don't know what the question is anymore. But I just spread my feelings to all of you. And thanks for listening to all of them.
We're very grateful. I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, but I think we're very grateful.
How did you feel about that with your character?
I didn't like the hijackiness of it. I didn't like not being worn so I could feather it into my character. But in retrospect, I'm extremely grateful of the hijackiness of it. Because most people are hijacked by disability. They don't get a chance to prepare for it, or feather it into their lives and warn their relatives and loved ones. You know, in 18 months I'm going to be disabled. It happens to us like falling off a bridge. And I'm listening to you, and I hope I'm not sending this in the wrong direction. But I think there's a message that is just beginning to evolve in my head, that you may have been screaming from the rooftops for a long time, but I'm only just hearing. And that is, as a society, an ableist society, to use your phraseology, we are concentrating on how different you are from the others, how different you are from the median, instead of concentrating how similar we are. Because I think once we understand each other's similarities, and this goes through all the subcultures as well, societal subcultures, as also the neurodiverse cultures, the physically diverse cultures, we spend an awful lot of time catering to our differences and not to our similarities. And our similarities are astonishingly, I mean, like 99.9%. Like it's amazing. Just people of color talk constantly about the fact that we have all the same atomic structure, except for this tiny little genetic deviance. And it's obvious, and kids know this, but we still don't do it. We still don't concentrate on our similarities, because the similarities, the things we see in each other that we recognize in ourselves, are actually the things we fall in love with. They're the things that that I find attractive. And we're concentrating on the things that we find repellent. And that seems to me on its head the way we should be approaching this. And why I think you may have been choosing, why I referred to the movement as polite. Because I think you know this already. And you don't want to exacerbate the differences. And so that's from an insider's point of view. I'm now considering myself an insider with you, and not an outsider. And I think part of the problem is that I'm forever apologizing for not being you. And I am you. I'm exactly you. And we're all exactly each other. And we're much more happy going out to fight for the longevity of, amoeba in the ocean than we are looking after each other. And not that they don't all need looking after, but there's only so much time in God's life, God's world, that we can actually achieve all of the things. But each other, the flesh and blood I can touch right here, this is the easy stuff. Why do we make it so damn hard? That's not a question you can answer. You should be screaming at that to me.
I had a slight answer to that. And it actually touches on something you mentioned earlier, fear. Because disability is not avoidable, but if you don't think about it, sometimes you think maybe you can dodge it. Maybe you can live a healthier life and never be disabled, which, that's not the case. I was very healthy until a very tiny bug bit me. So, there's no dodging it, but acknowledging that there's no dodging it is terrifying.
And we don't like talking about it because it makes us other. It makes us deficient. I had a doctor once who said, well, just find someone more attractive. I didn't. But these things happen to us, and they are inevitable, just as you said. We are all going to be disabled. So we better get good at it. In our 20s, when we first have a sight of what each other looks like and feels like, and how important our love is to each other.
I've said for ages, we're going to get into education. talk about it at school. That was one of the reasons why everyone at my school fought so hard for me to go back there after my injury. I was the only one there in a wheelchair, but they wanted me to go back so that the young kids would start asking questions. And that's why I went back. So we've got to get it there ultimately for it to really make that lasting impact.
I had kind of an opposite experience. I was a theater major, and when my first couple of years being disabled, I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't hold myself up. I couldn't do a lot. And my theater advisor was like, well, first of all, my theater advisor had to meet me outside of his office because we couldn't get my wheelchair in there to him. But then he was like, neither of our stages are accessible. And to graduate with this degree, you have to perform on stage. So you're going to need to find another major. So I kind of got pushed out of that. So.
You have a burning question. I know you.
Sorry.
I was thinking about what you said in the front row and about my experiences with myself and my students at school. And we talk about being a lot alike and about the differences, especially with physical disabilities, with the kind of cringe away factor. But there's also the group of us that we look pretty much like everybody else, and we sort of pass at least some of the time. But then our teachers and sometimes each other, we have expectations that we cannot fulfill the way they think that we should. Students who have difficulty with the fluorescent lights in the classroom because they just overwhelm, or with the amount of executive function it takes when you change the due date on a test, and trying to make that more accessible means we also have to be willing to listen to people who are different, who don't always look different, when they say, no, this is not something I can do.
Yes, for sure. We are basically out of time. And thank you everyone who has come. If you do want to continue the discussion, you can find Rob on Twitter at Rob Moriarty.
Good luck spelling that one.
It's like Sherlock Holmes' killer.
Nice.
So
Oh, I've never heard that one before.
you can find Sid has a Twitter at Siddig. Well, it's not Sid, it's his account. It's managed by the lovely Mel. And then I'm on Twitter at Tadandadr. Good luck spelling that too. It's Tadandadr. Thank you so very much for coming.